Begins by showing a young man, Eun-woo, who wakes up after having a bad dream. He drinks water to calm himself, not realizing that in his room, there is a mysterious girl who is staring at him intensely. Of course, he became shocked when he saw her until he spat the water in his mouth. Hearing the fuss from Eun-woo's room, his sister, Jo-yoon, then rushes in with a baseball bat, thinking that a thief has broken into their house. And just like him, she is surprised to see the mysterious girl sitting quietly at the side of the room, as if nothing is wrong. The girl continued to be silent as the two siblings screamed in panic in front of her. Finally, annoyed to hear them keep screaming, their father, Dr. Cha, goes into the room to calm them down. But still, that doesn't necessarily make Jo-yoon's curiosity go away, so she asks her father who the mystery girl really is. On the other hand, Eun-woo doesn't care at all. All he wanted was for Dr. Cha, and the girl immediately left so he could continue sleeping. Of course, his response made Dr. Cha offended because he hadn't seen his two children in a long time. But it was only natural for Eun-woo to act like that. His relationship with his father is not good because their father rarely comes home. Jo-yoon knows all too well about it, but she realizes now's not the time to fight. Above all, she wanted to know who the girl in their house was. And so, after Eun-woo calmed down, Dr. Cha explained the girl's identity. She turned out to be not a human, but an android called AI number 1. This is the reason why Dr. Cha has not seen his two children for a long time, because he has been too busy researching AI for most of his life. Hearing the madness coming from their father's mouth, Eun-woo's anger rose again. He shouted in annoyance while pointing at the android, although a moment later, he suddenly went silent to see what the android was doing. Right in front of him, the android lifted the large shelf with one hand without difficulty, and she did so only to pick up the baseball under the shelf. Eun-woo and Jo-yoon gape in amazement at the android's power. Unlike the case with Dr. Cho, who proudly explains that apart from being strong, the android has the intelligence to learn how to communicate and act like humans. However, because the android looked like a 17-year-old teenage girl, she only had the thoughts of a high school student. But all those explanations don't impress Eun-woo at all. He still wants his father to quickly leave the house. And so, to avoid unnecessary fights, Jo-yoon is forced to persuade Dr. Cha to go for the time being, while she and Eun-woo will look after the android. Their father agrees. So, after he gives Jo-yoon a flash drive containing a guide for managing androids, he leaves the house. Jo-yoon's mind is still filled with curiosity about the android. So, she asked the android a lot of questions, including her name, to which the android answered that her name was AI number 1. But she felt that the name was not suitable for it. Therefore, she decided to give her a new name, and it was Annie. Seeing his sister getting to know the android so quickly, Eun-woo couldn't help but shake his head in disbelief. He still couldn't accept the presence of their father's android. The next day, the two siblings are on their way as usual, with Eun-woo attending classes at his university and Jo-yoon working as a high school teacher. But a little different from the usual day, now she has Annie to take care of. Therefore, she decided to take Annie to her school so she could learn about how to behave like a human directly from other humans. But Jo-yoon asks Annie to hide her true identity from others and act as her cousin instead. Because if someone else finds out that she is an android, she is worried that something bad might happen to her, and she doesn't want her worries to turn into reality. With that agreement, the two of them enter the classroom, where Jo-yoon then introduces Annie to the students. She claims that Annie is her cousin who just came from America. Luckily, the students warmly welcome Annie, putting her at ease. Sometime later, Eun-woo gets a call from Jo-yoon, who asks him to take Annie home with him, arguing that she has a business trip scheduled, so she can't take Annie home. Jo-yoon knows Eun-woo will refuse, so she threatens to kill him if he dares to refuse her orders. The threat worked well. He immediately agrees to take Annie home. But unexpectedly, Annie doesn't want to go home with Eun-woo. She says she can go home alone, and he doesn't have to worry about her. Indeed, Eun-woo wasn't worried about her. Instead, he became worried about his father. So, Eun-woo called Dr. Cha after he got home, though he ended up getting mad at his father again because he didn't come home. After Eun-woo hangs up, Dr. Cha suddenly gets into trouble. It turned out that a man dressed in black was chasing after him. Who the man was is still a mystery, but he was eager to harm Dr. Cha, and he managed to do it easily. Meanwhile, Eun-woo is still worried about his father, so he calls him again. But his call was ignored by the man in black, who oddly wore big sunglasses at night. Then, he takes Dr. Cha's body away to get rid of the evidence. The next day at school, Annie makes some friends, namely Tae-hee and Ji-yoon. She speaks English as best she can with her two new friends, because after all, Jo-yoon unnecessarily said that she was from America during the introduction session on the first day. But then, Ji-yoon starts to wonder a bit when Annie doesn't drink her juice during breaks. And so, rather forcefully, she asked Annie to drink the juice immediately. But luckily, just before she drinks it, Jo-yoon appears and snatches the juice from her hands before sending Annie's two new friends to class. Then, looking at the juice, she asked if Annie could drink it. To which he replied that she did not know. Not wanting to take the risk, Jo Yoon then asked Annie not to eat the food or drink that other people gave her. Meanwhile, at college, Eun Woo runs into his girlfriend, Sol B, who invites him to lunch. But before they could leave, a man came up to them and asked him to talk. The man is Song Ki, Dr. Cha's colleague and Jo Yoon's boyfriend. It turns out he came to see Eun Woo on purpose because he couldn't contact Dr. Cha, so he asked Eun Woo to try to contact him. But as we all know, Eun Woo hasn't been able to contact his father since last night. Song Ki thought that Dr. Cha must have turned off his phone because he was busy. But then, Eun Woo becomes suspicious when he finds Dr. Cha's glasses lying on the street as he walks home. At the same time, Annie is learning to smile in front of the mirror at home, leaving Jo Yoon astonished at her behavior. Even so, she is confused as to why people like to smile and laugh, to which Jo Yoon replies that they like to do that when they're happy. But when she asks what happy means, Jo Yoon has difficulty answering. Before she can give a satisfactory answer, she is interrupted by Yoon Hoo's return. The two siblings then had dinner with Annie accompanying them. But she doesn't eat. Instead, she watches them devour the food, making him feel uneasy. So, he protests against Jo Yoon, asking why she made Annie sit with them at the dinner table if the android can't eat. Jo Yoon certainly has her reasons. That was because Annie was part of their family, and the family had to be at the same table at dinner, whether they had dinner or not. Jo Yoon's answer makes Annie seem a little touched. And unlike usual, Yoon Hoo relents. It seems he is trying to accept her presence in the house. A few days later, Jo Yoon checks the guide her father gave her to check if it's safe for Annie to eat and drink. But after scrolling through the documents for some time, she couldn't find any information. Even so, Annie decided to try drinking the juice, and the result was that she immediately ran into an error. Luckily, her damage wasn't too bad, and Jo Yoon could still repair her. Then the next day, Jo Yoon goes to a cafe to meet Song Ki and talk about Dr. Cha, who is uncontactable. By now, Jo Yoon might feel she needs help taking care of Annie long term. But since her father is still nowhere to be found, she decides to tell him about Annie the android. As it turned out, this was the first time he'd heard of Annie. Meanwhile, when school is over, Annie meets the black-clad agent who seems to be after her. But as he walked closer to her, he had a hard time breaking through the sheer number of students walking out of the school. His incompetence, thus, gives Eun Woo a chance to grab her and lead her into hiding. Yes, somehow, he was at Annie's school, and he realized that the man in black had bad intentions toward Annie. And miraculously, the agent can't find Eun Woo and Annie, even though they're hiding in the low and sparse bushes. He immediately gave up and left after only a few seconds of searching. Regardless, Yoon Hoo asks Annie about the black-clad agent, as she seems surprised to see him. She didn't know him, but based on the information she had heard from Dr. Cha, she knew he was a bad person. One day at school, Annie is surprised when a boy gives her a gift, while confessing in front of the whole class. But apparently, the guy already has a girlfriend, the blonde girl from the next class. And so, without wasting any more time, she stormed into Annie's class and confronted her. She and her friends accuse Annie of being a flirty girl who seduces someone else's boyfriend. Obviously, the baseless accusations angered Tae-hee and Ji-yoon, who immediately tried to stop them. But one of the blonde girl's friends wouldn't accept it if someone else interfered in their business. So, to make them understand, she raised her hand to slap them. However, Annie reacted quickly by catching the girl's hand before it landed on her friend's cheek. The girl finally felt how strong Annie was. She simply couldn't let go of Annie's strong grip. Unfortunately, just when the massacre looks like it's about to happen, Jo Yoon enters the classroom and interrupts them. Then, she punished Annie and her two friends before reporting the blonde girl group's misbehavior to their homeroom teacher. When the class bell rings, Jo Yoon forbids Annie and the others from attending class. She told them to continue standing outside the classroom, reflecting on their actions. But Tae-hee and Ji-yoon don't want to go through the boring punishment. And so, they brought Annie to play truant and have fun outside school. One of the fun activities they do is karaoke, where Annie dances to the beat of the music. And unexpectedly, she could do it, although it was a little stiff at first. Now aware that Annie can dance well, Tae-hee and Ji-yoon then advised her to try joining Blackpink. But actually, both girls like BTS more. They even really like the boy band. Hearing the silly conversation of the two friends, Annie finally knew what it meant to like someone. And for the first time, she smiled naturally, indicating that she enjoyed being around her friends. Without hesitation, she immediately expressed her love for Tae-hee and Ji-yoon. The next day, Annie tries to wake Eun Woo by bringing her face close to his, which of course, takes him by surprise. Turns out she was about to tell him breakfast was ready. And when he says that he doesn't want breakfast, she imitates what Jo Yoon does whenever he acts fussy. She pinched his ear. Annie's behavior made Eun Woo couldn't help but laugh. And then he strokes her head to compliment her, making her feel a mysterious feeling for him. A feeling bigger than just liking someone. It was just that she still didn't know what that feeling was. One day, Eun-woo invites Annie to meet his girlfriend so he can introduce them to each other. As agreed with Jo-yoon, he introduces Annie as his cousin. Indeed, unlike Annie, who had mysterious feelings for him, he had no feelings for her. So, he acts affectionately with his girlfriend right in front of Annie, unconsciously making her jealous. So jealous, she even hates his girlfriend. The incident makes their relationship awkward, and Annie always tries to avoid Eun-woo at home. Over time, Eun-woo becomes impatient with her behavior, and because of that, he asks Annie to talk about what her problem really is. He suspected that Annie was having trouble with her program, but when he told her that, she immediately denied it. Her program isn't broken at all. She just always feels weird around him these days, she says. After saying that, she went to avoid him again. Meanwhile, Song-ki tells Jo-yoon that today is Annie's birthday. Therefore, she started making plans to celebrate at home. And so that she can prepare for the party, she asks Eun-woo to take Annie out for a walk. He agrees to carry out the mission from Jo-yoon, even though his relationship with her is currently very awkward. Long story short, the two of them go for a walk, and when they get home, Jo-yoon, Song-ki, Tae-hee, and Ji-yoon welcome her with a big surprise. Of course, Annie was so happy about the surprise that she had a big smile, shocking Eun-woo to learn that she could actually smile. But the joy didn't last long. A few days later, the students at the school began to train hard for the sports festival that would be held soon. The exercise was undoubtedly very exhausting for Annie. So, when Tae-hee finishes practice and Ji-yoon invites her to go to the toilet with them, she refuses because she has to charge herself. Incidentally, the class is currently empty, so she can freely take out the charger and insert the USB cable into the hole on the nape of her neck. But this makes her inevitably have to hibernate for a while, so the battery can quickly charge. Unfortunately, Ji-yoon returned to class at that time because she forgot to bring something. She saw the USB cable stuck in Annie's neck. Obviously, the strange sight made her scream in fright. Her screams are so loud they can be heard by Jo-yoon, who rushes into the classroom. She realizes that the secret has been exposed, so she tries to explain it as simply as possible to Ji-yoon. And so, Ji-yoon finally finds out that Annie is a robot, an android, or whatever her name is. This incident made Annie wonder about herself. She is confused about what and who she really is. Here, Jo-yoon tries to cheer her up, saying that she doesn't care who or what she is because, in her eyes, Annie is still Annie. But her efforts were not successful. She just couldn't figure out who she was and needed a definitive answer. The situation at school didn't help her. The next day, Ji-yoon is still scared of Annie, so she tries to persuade Ji-yoon to want to be friends with her again. But, despite her best efforts, Ji-yoon remains terrified of her. She even told Annie to leave and not to come near her again. Disappointed, Annie does as Ji-yoon wants. She left her without another word. But as it turned out, Annie was really gone. She did not return home. As soon as she finds out that Annie is missing, Jo-yoon immediately reports it to Eun-woo, who is currently hanging out with Song-ki and Sol-bi. And so, everyone close to Annie gathered to look for her together. And they had to find her fast, because she didn't take the charger with her, especially since her battery was about to run out. If her battery dies, the system will automatically shut down, making her look like a human who has lost her life. But, where should they look for her? They didn't know where she had gone. Luckily, after thinking for a while, Eun-woo says that he might know where they should go looking. The other day he had dreamed of Annie being on a dark little street where there was a claw machine. Her two friends knew where it was, so they hurried off without wasting any more time. Meanwhile, Annie met again with the agent, who liked to wear sunglasses, even though it was getting dark. But unfortunately, her battery has now run out. With that, she fell helplessly, making the agent's job easier. But, just before he touched her, a voice suddenly ordered him to stop. The voice turns out to be Eun-woo, who immediately tries to hit the agent to save Annie. But his punches were so bad that the agent could easily dodge him and strike back. Fortunately, at this moment, the others finally arrived on the scene, and they immediately screamed for help, forcing the agent to flee. The next day, Annie returns to school, although Ji-yoon still seems scared of her. But when she opens her locker, she finds a lot of orange juice inside, which Ji-yoon gave her. And along with the juices, Ji-yoon left an apology note. She can accept Annie as she is, whether she is a robot or an android. Elsewhere, Eun-woo meets Sol-bi and wants to break up. He confesses that he has special feelings for Annie, and he can no longer continue his relationship with her. Unexpectedly, she is willing to give up if he wants to be with Annie because she feels Annie is different from other girls. After settling things with Sol-bi, Eun-woo then picks up Annie at her school and takes her on a date to a park. And it was there that they finally confessed their feelings for each other. Without further ado, she expresses her joy by kissing his cheek, much to his surprise. When he asked where she learned about kissing, she innocently replied that she learned from Korean dramas. So, with this, Annie and Eun-woo officially dating. And even more fun, they live under the same roof. But that doesn't mean there won't be more incidents. One day, while they were cleaning the house, Eun-woo found a laptop in the back of the house, and neither he nor Jo-yoon knew who owned it. They were naturally curious about the contents of the laptop, but they decided to check it out later. After cleaning up the house, Jo-yoon invites Annie to go shopping. But it's not far before they walk from the house. She remembers that she didn't bring her purse, and so she asks Annie to wait for her while she returns home to get it. But, being a kind future sister-in-law, Annie offers to take her purse instead. But at this point, Eun-woo can't contain his curiosity anymore, so he decides to check the laptop without waiting for his sister to come home. It turns out the laptop belongs to his father, and he finds a video recorded by his father. And in the video, he hears an explanation from his father about Annie, an explanation he probably shouldn't have heard. So, Annie is actually a prototype android created by Dr. Cha so that she can study human emotions, but he designed her in such a way that she thinks she is not much different from a real human. To achieve that goal, he decided to implant the memory of a human in Annie as her data. And he chooses the memory of the person he loves, who is none other than Eun-woo and Jo-yoon's mother. With this data, Annie can have awareness and can study emotions. Dr. Cha believes that with this method, he can remake Eun-woo's mother's feelings. Although, he knew he had to apologize to his two children for using their mother's memory without their permission. Shortly after Eun-woo watches the video of his father, Annie appears. And he chose to tell her what he had just heard. He said she was practically his own mother because, after all, she had memories of his mother. So, Annie most likely misunderstood what she felt for Eun-woo. It's not love for the person she likes, but the love of a mother for her child. Annie was able to become who she is today because of the memory of his mother. His mother's memory greatly influenced what she felt at this moment. But Annie disagrees with Eun-woo. She insists that she is not Eun-woo's mother because she has her own thoughts, emotions, and memories. Having said it all, she heads outside, leaving Eun-woo, who still needs time to process everything. Annie continued to walk alone until nightfall. And as if it couldn't get any worse, at this moment, the agent appears again to kidnap her. But unlike before, now Annie's battery was charged, so she could put up a fight. She could even corner the agent in their fight, forcing him to use a gun. Before the agent pulled the trigger, Eun-woo came running to protect Annie. But the agent acts faster than him. He shoots Annie, knocking her to the ground before Eun-woo can reach her. Some time has passed, and Annie has been fixed by Song-ki. She looked fine now, just like before her fight with the agent. But because her head hit the ground hard at that time, her system became corrupt, forcing her to be reinstalled. As a result, she can no longer remember Eun-woo, Jo-yoon, and the people she's known for the past few months. Even so, both Eun-woo and Jo-yoon can accept Annie's current condition, as long as she's happy. After Eun-woo and Jo-yoon leave, Song-ki asks Annie, or now called AI number 1, to return to her room. But her response took him by surprise. It turns out that she can remember her name. And after that, she smiled widely. Apparently, even though her system has been reinstalled, the data and information she has collected are safe, so she can still remember who she and her friends are. At the end of the film, Annie is seen returning to Eun-woo and Jo-yoon's house, making the two siblings both surprised and happy to see her back. The moral that can be learned from this movie is, memory plays a significant role in shaping who we are today. Without our memory, we will lose our identity. So, take good care of the memories we have. When we are old, we can reminisce about all of the memories throughout our lives. And hopefully, our memories can make us proud of ourselves.